the unknowable. We too often forget, says Spencer at the outset, that not only is there a soul of goodness in things evil, but generally also a soul of truth in things erroneous. He proposes, therefore, to examine religious ideas with a view to finding that core of truth which, under the changing form of many faiths, has given to religion its persistent power over the human soul. What he finds at once is that every theory of the origin of the universe drives us into inconceivabilities. The atheist tries to think of a self-existent world, uncaused and without beginning, but we cannot conceive of anything beginningless or uncaused. The theist merely puts back the difficulty by a step, and to the theologian who says God made the world, the child's unanswerable query comes, who made God? All ultimate religious ideas are logically inconceivable. All ultimate scientific ideas are equally beyond rational conception. What is matter? We reduce it to atoms and then find ourselves forced to divide the atom as we had divided the molecule. We are driven into the dilemma that matter is infinitely divisible, which is inconceivable, or that there is a limit to its divisibility, which also is inconceivable. So with the divisibility of space and time, both of these are ultimately irrational ideas. Motion is wrapped in a triple obscurity, since it involves matter changing, in time, its position in space. When we analyze matter resolutely, we find nothing at last but force, a force impressed upon our organs of sense, or a force resisting our organs of action. And who shall tell us what force is? Turn from physics to psychology, and we come upon mind and consciousness, and here are greater puzzles than before. Ultimate scientific ideas, then, are all representations of realities that cannot be comprehended. In all directions, the scientist's investigations bring him face to face with an insoluble enigma, and he ever more clearly perceives it to be an insoluble enigma. He learns at once the greatness and the littleness of the human intellect, its power in dealing with all that comes within the range of experience, its impotence in dealing with all that transcends experience. He, more than any other, truly knows that in its ultimate nature nothing can be known. The only honest philosophy, to use Huxley's word, is agnosticism. The common cause of these obscurities is the relativity of all knowledge. Thinking being relating, no thought can express more than relations. Intellect, being framed simply by and for converse with phenomena, involves us in nonsense when we try to use it for anything beyond phenomena. And yet the relative and phenomenal imply by their names and natures something beyond them, something ultimate and absolute. On watching our thoughts, we see how impossible it is to get rid of the consciousness of an actuality lying behind appearances, and how from this impossibility results our indestructible belief in that actuality. But what that actuality is, we cannot know. From this point of view, the reconciliation of science and religions is no longer very difficult. Truth generally lies in the coordination of antagonistic opinions. Let science admit that its laws apply only to phenomena and the relative. Let religion admit that its theology is a rationalizing myth for a belief that defies conception. Let religion cease to picture the absolute as a magnified man, much worse as a cruel and bloodthirsty and treacherous monster, afflicted with a love of adulation such as would be despised in a human being. Let science cease to deny deity or to take materialism for granted. Mind and matter are equally relative phenomena, the double effect of an ultimate cause whose nature must remain unknown. The recognition of this inscrutable power is the core of truth in every religion and the beginning of all philosophy. Evolution. Having indicated the unknowable, philosophy surrenders it and turns its face to what can be known. Metaphysics is a mirage. As Michelet put it, it is the art of befuddling oneself methodically. The proper field and function of philosophy lies in the summation and unification of the results of science. Knowledge of the lowest kind is ununified knowledge. Science is partially unified knowledge. Philosophy is completely unified knowledge. Such complete unification requires a broad and universal principle that will include all experience, and will describe the essential features of all knowledge. Is there a principle of this kind? We may perhaps approach such a principle by trying to unify the highest generalizations of physics. These are the indestructibility of matter, the conservation of energy, the continuity of motion, the persistence of relations among forces, i.e. the inviolability of natural law, the transformability and equivalence of forces, even of mental and physical forces, and the rhythm of motion. This last generalization, not usually recognized, needs only to be pointed out. All nature is rhythmical, from the pulsations of heat to the vibrations of violin strings, from the undulations of light, heat, and sound to the tides of the sea, from the periodicities of sex to the periodicities of planets and comets and stars, from the alternation of night and day to the succession of the seasons, and perhaps to the rhythms of climatic change, from the oscillations of molecules to the rise and fall of nations and the birth and death of stars. All these laws of the knowable are reducible, by an analysis which must not here be followed in detail, to the final law of the persistence of force. But there is something static and inert about this principle. It does not so much as hint at the secret of life. What is the dynamic principle of reality? What is the formula of the growth and decay of all things? It must be a formula of evolution and dissolution, for an entire history of anything must include its appearance out of the imperceptible and its disappearance into the imperceptible. So Spencer offers us his famous formula of evolution, which made the intellect of Europe gasp for breath, required 10 volumes and 40 years for its explanation. Evolution is an integration of matter and a concomitant dissipation of motion, during which the matter passes from an indefinite incoherent homogeneity to a definite coherent heterogeneity, and during which the retained motion undergoes a parallel transformation. What does this mean? The growth of planets out of nebulae, the formation of oceans and mountains on the earth, the metabolism of elements by plants and of animal tissues by men, the development of the heart in the embryo and the fusion of bones after birth, the unification of sensations and memories into knowledge and thought, and of knowledge into science and philosophy, the development of families into clans and gentes and cities and states and alliances, and the federation of the world. Here is the integration of matter, the aggregation of separate items into masses and groups and wholes. Such integration, of course, involves a lessening of motion in the parts, as the growing power of the state lessens the freedom of the individual. But at the same time, it gives to the parts an interdependence, a protective tissue of relationships, which constitute coherence and promote corporate survival. The process brings to a greater definiteness of forms and functions. The nebula is shapeless, nebulous. And yet out of it come the elliptical regularity of the planets, the sharp lines of mountain chains, the specific form and character of organisms and organs, the division of labor and specialization of function in physiological and political structures, etc. And the parts of this integrating whole become not merely definite but diverse, heterogeneous in nature and operation. The primeval nebula is homogeneous, i.e., it consists of parts that are alike. But soon it is differentiated into gases and liquids and solids. The earth becomes here green with grass, there white with mountain tops, or blue with the multitudinous sea. Evolving life begets, out of a relatively homogeneous protoplasm, the varied organs of nutrition, reproduction, locomotion, and perception. A simple language fills whole continents with its multiplying dialects. A single science breeds 100, and the folklore of a nation flowers into 1,000 forms of literary art. Individuality grows, character stands out uniquely, and every race and people develops its particular genius. Integration and heterogeneity, aggregation of parts into ever larger wholes, and differentiation of parts into ever more varied forms. These are the foci of the orbit of evolution. Whatever passes from diffusion to integration and unity, and from a homogeneous simplicity to a differentiated complexity, is in the flow of evolution. Whatever is returning from integration to diffusion and from complexity to simplicity is caught in the ebb of dissolution. Not content with this synthetic formula, Spencer endeavors to show how it follows by inevitable necessity from the natural operation of mechanical forces. There is first a certain instability of the homogeneous, i.e., similar parts cannot long remain similar because they are unevenly subjected to external forces. Outer parts, e.g., are sooner attacked, like coastline towns in war, and the variety of occupations molds similar men into the varied embodiments of 100 professions and trades. There is again a multiplication of effects. One cause may produce a vast variety of results and help to differentiate the world. A world amiss, like Marie Antoinette's, or an altered telegram at Ems, or a wind at Salamis, may play an endless role in history. And there is the law of segregation. The parts of a relatively homogeneous whole, being driven separate into different areas, are shaped by diverse environments into dissimilar products, as the English become Americans or Canadians or Australians, according to the genius of the place. In these many ways, the forces of nature build the variety of this evolving world. But finally and inescapably comes equilibration. Every motion, being motion under resistance, must sooner or later come to an end. Every rhythmic oscillation, unless externally reinforced, suffers some loss of rate and amplitude. The planets ride through a lesser orbit, or will ride, than once they rode. The sun will shine less warmly and brightly as the centuries pass away. The friction of the tides will retard the rotation of the earth. This globe that throbs and murmurs with a million motions and luxuriates into a million forms of riotously breeding life will someday move more leisurely in its orbit and its parts. The blood will run cooler and more slowly in our desiccated veins. We shall not hurry anymore. Like dying races, we shall think of heaven in terms of rest and not of life. We shall dream of nirvana. Gradually and then rapidly, equilibration will become dissolution, the unhappy epilogue of evolution. Societies will disintegrate, masses will migrate, cities will fade into the dark hinterland of peasant life. No government will be strong enough to hold the loosened parts together. Social order will cease to be even remembered. And in the individual, too, integration will give way to disruption. And that coordination which is life will pass into that diffuse disorder which is death. The earth will be a chaotic theater of decay, a gloomy drama of energy and irreversible degradation, and it will itself be resolved into the dust and nebula from which it came. The cycle of evolution and dissolution will be complete. The cycle will begin again and endless times again, but always this will be the denouement. Memento mori is written upon the face of life, and every birth is a prelude to decay and death. First Principles is a magnificent drama telling with almost classic calm the story of the rise and fall, the evolution and dissolution of planets and life and man. But it is a tragic drama for which the fittest epilogue is Hamlet's word. The rest is silence. Is there any wonder that men and women nurtured on faith and hope rebelled against this summary of existence? We know that we must die, but as it is a matter that will take care of itself, we prefer to think of life. There was in Spencer an almost Schopenhauerian sense of the futility of human effort. At the end of his triumphant career, he expressed his feeling that life was not worth living. He had the philosopher's disease of seeing so far ahead that all the little pleasant shapes and colors of existence passed under his nose unseen. He knew that people would not relish a philosophy whose last word was not God and heaven, but equilibration and dissolution. And in concluding this first part, he defended with unusual eloquence and fervor his right to speak the dark truths that he saw. Whoever hesitates to utter that which he thinks the highest truth, lest it should be too much in advance of the time, may reassure himself by looking at his acts from an impersonal point of view. Let him remember that opinion is the agency through which character adapts external arrangements to itself, and that his opinion rightly forms part of this agency, is a unit of force constituting with other such units the general power which works out social changes, and he will perceive that he may properly give utterance to his innermost conviction, leaving it to produce what effect it may. It is not for nothing that he has in him these sympathies with some principles and repugnance to others. He, with all his capacities and aspirations and beliefs, is not an accident but a product of the time. While he is a descendant of the past, he is a parent of the future. And his thoughts are as children born to him, which he may not carelessly let die. Like every other man, he may properly consider himself as one of the myriad agencies through whom works the unknown cause. And when the unknown cause produces in him a certain belief, he is thereby authorized to profess and act out that belief. Not as adventitious, therefore, will the wise man regard the faith that is in him. The highest truth he sees he will fearlessly utter, knowing that, let what may come of it, he is thus playing his right part in the world, knowing that if he can effect the change he aims at, well; if not, well also, though not so well. Biology, the evolution of life. Life is the continuous adjustment of internal relations to external relations. The completeness of life depends on the completeness of this correspondence, and life is perfect when the correspondence is perfect. The correspondence is not a merely passive adaptation. What distinguishes life is the adjustment of internal relations in anticipation of a change in external relations, as when an animal crouches to avoid a blow, or a man makes a fire to warm his food. The defect of the definition lies not merely in its tendency to neglect the remolding activity of the organism upon the environment, but in its failure to explain what is that subtle power whereby an organism is enabled to make these prophetic adjustments that characterize vitality.